My puppy heard trouble long before I admitted something was wrong. My name is Joel, and that night in Denver, Colorado, I was half watching the news when my German Shepherd puppy froze at the front door. Brio was 4 months old, usually all paws and enthusiasm, but suddenly he went stiff, ears up, nose pressed to the crack at the bottom. At first, I told myself he was just chasing smells in his head. Then I heard it too. There were voices in the hallway, the kind that don't sound like normal neighbor noise. Heavy footsteps, someone talking low and serious, a woman trying not to cry. A sharp knock, then another door opening. Then that quiet you get when people are trying very hard not to be heard. I'm not going to tell you their details. It wasn't my business, and you're here for the dogs, not for whatever mess people made of their lives on the other side of that wall. What mattered is what came next. Our door was open just a crack when the elevator dinged and 2 people in rescue jackets walked past, clipboards in hand. Between their legs moved a Doberman mix on a thin leash, body folded in on itself like he was trying to disappear. His head hung so low his nose nearly brushed the carpet, tail jammed tight under his belly, eyes locked on the floor. Brio slid forward until he was almost lying on the threshold, paw stretched out, nose reaching. The Doberman never even glanced at him. One of the rescuers caught my eye and spoke like it was a simple fact. "We're taking him to the rescue," she said. "He's completely shut down. If he ever wakes up, it'll be a miracle." The door closed behind them. Brio stayed planted there, staring at that empty hallway long after the elevator doors had swallowed the dog whole. By morning, the hallway was quiet, but my puppy hadn't moved on. Brio kept circling back to the neighbor's door like he'd misplaced something important. He'd sniff the crack, sit for a second, then pace to our window and stare at the parking lot, as if that Doberman might just materialize again if he watched hard enough. The wall between our apartments felt heavier than usual, like someone had packed the empty unit with all the noise that used to live there. I was making coffee when my phone rang. The caller ID showed the local rescue we'd fostered for a few times before. "Hey, Joel," the coordinator said, her voice already carrying bad news. "Do you remember the Doberman mix from your building last night? He's here with us. He's not eating, not responding, just sitting in the corner with his nose in the wall. We're running out of tricks." She reminded me they knew I was good with the tough ones, which is a nice way of saying I've had my heart broken more than once. They were hoping I could take him for a couple of weeks, give him a quieter place to fall apart, maybe convince him that food and people weren't the enemy. I looked around my own life while she talked. 2 kids, a full-time job, a growing German Shepherd puppy already taking up more space than his body accounted for. My brain was stacking bills and schedules and all the sensible reasons to say no. Then Brio heard the word Doberman float out of the speaker. He froze, whipped his head toward the door, and ran straight to it, scratching at the wood with both front paws like he was trying to dig someone back through. I watched him for a long second, phone warm against my ear. "Bring him here," I finally said. "If he's going to wake up anywhere, it'll be where my puppy won't leave him alone." He didn't walk into our home. He drifted in like a shadow. That evening, the rescue van pulled up outside our building in Denver, and a few minutes later, there he was in my living room on the end of a thin leash. They'd written Doberman mix on his intake sheet, but what stepped onto our big rug in front of the gray couch didn't feel like a dog as much as the empty outline of a dog. Brio hopped up onto the couch, taller for once, watching. The tech unclipped the leash and Drift, that was the name they'd given him, folded himself down at the base of the sofa, right where the fabric met the floor. He curled so tight his spine made a hard curve, head shoved almost between his front paws, eyes glued to the pattern in the carpet. Tail tucked, shoulders caved in, breathing shallow. It hurt to look at him. You start wondering what has to happen to a young dog to make him that small on the inside. The answer sits somewhere between anger and a kind of heavy grief. Brio slid off the couch, picked up his favorite squeaky toy, and carried it over like an offering. He set it down right under Drift's nose, then backed up and wagged once, waiting. Nothing. No flick of an ear, no shift of his gaze, not even when Brio gave the toy one hopeful squeak. My kids tried next. They knelt on the rug, said his name in those soft, careful voices they use for hurt things. They clapped lightly, Sos rustled the treat bag, told him it was dinner time. Drift didn't move. The only sign he was even in there was a faint tremor along his shoulders, like his body remembered to shake even when his mind had checked out. We turned the lights down, and eventually everyone went to bed. Sometime after midnight, I got up for a glass of water and glanced into the living room. Brio was awake, sitting perfectly still in front of the couch, eyes fixed on Drift's curled body, staring at him the way you look at someone who fell asleep with their eyes open. The next few days blurred into a loop where nothing seemed to change, except inside my chest. Drift stayed folded at the base of the gray couch like he'd been poured there and dried in place. He only got up when the apartment was quiet. If we were in the kitchen, he'd drink from the water bowl in the living room. If I took the kids to school and Brio out to the courtyard, I'd come back to find his food finally touched. The moment a door opened, he was back in his corner, nose down, eyes back on the rug. Brio adjusted faster than the rest of us. My loud, clumsy German Shepherd puppy started moving differently around Drift, like someone walking in a room where a baby's asleep. Less bouncing, fewer sudden pounces. He'd wander over, sit down near that curled brown body, and lay one paw on the carpet just inches away without quite touching. No squeaky toys, no barking invites. Just a small, steady presence that said, "I'm here," without demanding anything in return. The strange part was what didn't bother Drift. Cartoons blaring from the TV, my son dropping a book on the hardwood, the apartment door slamming when the wind caught it, all the usual dog triggers. Nothing. He didn't flinch, didn't blink, didn't even twitch an ear. He was a statue that breathed. One afternoon, Brio trotted over a little too close and bumped Drift's shoulder with his nose by accident. It was the smallest touch, hardly more than a nudge. For the first time, Drift's head lifted half an inch off his paws. Not for our voices, not for all the noise we threw at the air, just for that quiet, gentle contact from another dog. Brio didn't forget that first flinch. He treated it like a door that had opened a crack. From then on, he started repeating the move that woke Drift up. He'd shuffle over, lean in, and give the lightest tap of his nose against Drift's shoulder, then back away and sit right in front of him, square in his line of sight. Not in his face, not demanding, just there. Sometimes he'd stay like that for 10, 15 minutes, head tilted, watching. If Drift didn't move, Brio would eventually lie down, stretched out like a little guard in front of a shut gate. No sighing, no frustration, just a kind of stubborn patience I don't usually see in 4-month-old dogs. One afternoon, a tennis ball rolled off the couch and wandered across the rug like it had a mind of its own. It bumped gently against Drift's front paws and stopped there. Brio froze, eyes on him, tail giving a tiny, hopeful wiggle. Drift stared at that ball for a long time. Nothing else on him moved. Then, so slowly I almost missed it. He lifted one paw and hooked a claw into the fuzz, dragging it an inch closer to his chest. He didn't pounce, didn't chew, didn't play. He just held it there like he was testing whether the world would let him keep one small thing. Brio didn't explode into a game like he normally would. He let out a soft breath, thumped his tail once against the rug, and stretched out beside him, close enough to share the moment, far enough not to scare it away. He let Drift be the one to own the toy. Watching them, I had the strange feeling I was seeing a conversation I couldn't translate. Something was happening between those two that didn't need my voice or my hands or my ideas about how healing was supposed to look. That night, another detail finally clicked. Drift jerked awake the second the kids thundered down the hall and the floor trembled under their feet. But a minute later, they were standing right beside him, laughing too loud and calling his name over and over. He didn't even blink. There's a special kind of fear that shows up when you realize the problem might be bigger than you thought. I called our rescue coordinator one afternoon, pacing the kitchen while Brio and Drift lay in their usual spots by the couch. I told her how Drift woke up when the kids shook the floor, but not when they shouted. How he ignored the TV, the doorbell, my voice right above his head. She went quiet for a second on the other end of the line. Sometimes they're not ignoring us, she finally said. They just never hear us. That sentence sat in my gut like a stone. All this time, I'd been telling myself that Drift was too traumatized to react. It hadn't really crossed my mind that maybe the world was screaming at him in a language he literally couldn't receive. A few nights later, a thunderstorm rolled over Denver. Rain hammered the windows, lightning flashed, and the sky started throwing its own furniture around. Brio lost his brave act fast. He paced between rooms, nails clicking, eyes wide, jumping at every rumble like the ceiling might fall. Drift didn't move. He was stretched out by the couch, head down on his paws, breathing slow and even, as if we'd turned on a white noise machine instead of summoning the apocalypse. Eventually, Brio gave up on running and went to the one thing in the room that wasn't reacting. He crept over, circled once, and pressed himself along Drift's side, tucking his nose under Drift's jaw. For the first time since he arrived, Drift adjusted his position, not to get away, but to make room. He shifted his chest, lifted his head a little, and let Brio slide his snout comfortably underneath. I watched them in the flicker of lightning, one dog shaking, one dog steady in his own silent world. Then I crossed the room, crouched down behind them, and clapped my hands once, hard, right next to Drift's ear. He didn't even flicker. There's only so much guessing you can do before it starts to feel unfair. I called our vet in Denver and booked the first slot I could get. When the day came, Brio jumped into the back seat like it was an adventure, and Drift had to be lifted in, stiff as a board but not fighting. They ended up pressed side by side, my German Shepherd puppy breathing warm fog onto the window while that Doberman mix stared at nothing. In the exam room, the vet listened while I tried to put weeks of small, strange moments into words. "He doesn't startle," I said. "Not at anything. He wakes up for vibration, but not for noise." She nodded, like she'd heard it before, and started with the easy tests. She clapped her hands behind his head. No reaction. She squeaked a toy, whistled, tapped a metal tray with a pen. Nothing. Then she stepped into his line of sight and snapped her fingers where he could see the motion but not hear it. His eyes tracked the movement. They tried a little tuning fork near his skull, watched his body, his breathing. Then they put a hand lightly on his shoulder and pressed down on the table so it vibrated. That was the one thing that made him glance up, just for a second. It didn't take long for her to say it out loud. "He's almost completely deaf," she told me, gentle but direct. Maybe an untreated infection, maybe an old injury. We probably won't ever know. But however it started, he's been living in a very quiet world for a long time. Suddenly, all his shut-down behavior slid into a different shape. The blank stare, the stillness, the way he folded in on himself when people got close. He wasn't being stubborn or dramatic. He'd spent who knows how many months watching mouths move and hands reach and having no idea what any of it meant. Through all of this, Brio worked like some unpaid assistant. Every time the vet stepped toward Drift, my puppy would trot around to make sure he crossed into Drift's field of vision first, like he was announcing, "Friend incoming. It's okay." If she touched Drift's leg, Brio's nose was already there, bumping his shoulder, like a translator adding a second layer of reassurance. On the drive home, the sky over Denver was starting to turn that pale evening blue. I glanced in the rearview mirror and saw them wedged together again, Brio's eyes bright, Drift softer now, but still so quiet. And it hit me that from the very first night in our hallway, the only one who'd been speaking Drift's language properly was the puppy who didn't say a word. It's funny how fast your house changes when you accept that sound isn't the main language anymore. After that vet visit, I stopped yelling Drift's name across the room and started doing something that felt stranger at first. I used my hands. Palm up meant come. 2 fingers toward my eyes meant look at me. A gentle tap on his shoulder before I moved around him, so he never had to guess what was happening behind his back. Brio picked it up faster than I did. He already knew the rules. He stopped charging in from behind and started looping wide arcs so he'd always appear in front of Drift, right where those tired brown eyes could see him. If it was dinner time, Brio would trot to the kitchen, bump his nose against Drift's shoulder, then jog ahead to the bowls, glancing back as if to say, "Follow me, it's safe." Slowly, Drift began to answer. He'd lift his head when I stepped into his line of sight and raised my hand. He'd walk over, plant himself in front of me, and search my face like he was learning to read the subtitles instead of the soundtrack. The kids started using the same signals, little hands making big, serious gestures, And Drift would ease up to them and lay his head carefully across their knees, as if he'd finally been invited into a conversation he could understand. One evening, after a day that felt almost normal, I opened my email and saw a message from the rescue. They'd found a family, they said, people who had lived with deaf dogs before, who understood the extra patience, who had a fenced yard and all the time in the world. On paper, it looked like everything we're supposed to want for a dog like Drift. Brio was asleep with his back pressed against Drift's side while I read. My head kept saying, "This is his chance." My chest answered, "This is how you break them both." The couple who came to meet Drift looked like they'd stepped straight out of a success story. They stood in my doorway with soft smiles and calm eyes, talking about the deaf shepherd they'd had before, about hand signals and patience and how quiet the house becomes when you lean into it. They had a big fenced yard, flexible jobs, a vet who already knew them by name. On paper, they were perfect. In person, they were kind. We sat in the living room while they knelt down and introduced themselves the way I described. No sudden moves, no reaching over his head. They crouched a few feet away, letting Drift see them, then raised open hands in a gentle, "Come here." Drift saw them. He really did. His eyes tracked their fingers, their faces, the way their bodies curved toward him. But every single time they called him with those careful gestures, his gaze flicked sideways to find Brio first. It was like he was asking a question only the puppy could answer. Brio sat pressed against him at the base of the couch, shoulder to shoulder with that brown, quiet dog. When the woman smiled and beckoned again, Drift's muscles twitched like he might consider it, then relaxed. The second Brio didn't move. At one point, Brio stood up, walked a slow circle, and planted himself directly between Drift and the open front door. He laid one paw across Drift's back, a light, steady weight, and just stayed there. Not growling, not stiff, just a small, solid barrier between his friend and the next goodbye. The couple saw it. You could read it on their faces. They looked at each other, then at me, and their voices got even softer. "We don't want to break something that's finally healing," the man said quietly. We talked for a while after that, about rescue and timing, and how sometimes best home and right home aren't the same thing. They left without a dog that day, which felt wrong and right at the same time. That night, long after everyone went to bed, I woke up to a strange pattern of sound, not barking, not whining, just the steady click of nails on hardwood, moving away from my room, then back again, then away. I got up, opened the door, and found Drift in the hallway, pacing from my bedroom to the kids' room and back, eyes wide, body tense. When he saw me, he didn't bolt or head for the couch. He turned, walked a few steps toward the kids' room, looked over his shoulder to make sure I was following, then kept going. Inside, Brio had his collar hooked on the handle of a bedside table, twisting in silent panic. Drift stood beside him, chest heaving, using his whole body to drag me toward the trouble neither of them could call out about. That night, the deaf dog was the only one who heard what my own puppy couldn't say. I unhooked Brio's collar from the table leg with shaking hands while he tried to crawl into my lap, all legs and relief. Beside us, Drift stood close enough that his shoulder brushed mine, eyes moving between me and the puppy like he was double-checking that we were both still in one piece. Nobody had barked, nobody had cried out, but he'd still gone down the hall and dragged me there with his whole body. I sank onto the floor between them, socks on cold hardwood, heart pounding harder than it should have. Brio flopped against my side, still trembling. Drift lowered himself on the other side, laying his head near my knee like he'd finally chosen a spot, and it was here. He didn't shut down here, I heard myself say, quieter than I meant to. He woke up here. This is his home. I don't know if either of them understood the words, but they both sighed at the same time, and it felt like an answer. The next morning, I called the rescue coordinator before I could talk myself out of it. I told her about Drift pacing the hallway, about him calling me without a sound, about the way he and Brio moved like one animal with two bodies now. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, I said, "I can't send him to that perfect yard. We'll find another way. He already picked his place." There was a long pause, then she let out a breath. "Honestly, we were hoping you'd say that." She offered what they could, help with food when they had grants, discounts at their partner vet, a trainer willing to do a few free sessions on deaf dog cues, and their promise to tell Drift's story so other shutdown dogs wouldn't be written off so fast. A week later, we went to the rescue office to make it official. Both dogs came, naturally. I signed the papers with my full name, Drift's new name, our address, the whole human side of the contract. When we were done, one of the staff members crouched down and held out her hands. Drift walked over on his own, no coaxing, and gently set his head in her palms for a moment, eyes soft, like a quiet thank you. Then he turned, trotted back across the room, and lowered himself beside Brio on the floor, pressing their shoulders together as he closed his eyes, as if that was his way of signing his part of the deal. I didn't plan on running a support group for scared dogs, but that's what our living room slowly became. Word got around at the rescue that Drift did better with another dog nearby, so whenever a new foster came in too shut down for the kennels, we were on the short list. They'd step into our apartment stiff and unsure, eyes wide, body ready to bolt. The first thing they saw was a calm, deaf Doberman mix watching them without pressure, and a confident German Shepherd puppy trotting up to say, "This is the place where nothing bad happens." Brio handled the introductions. He'd greet the newcomer, bounce exactly once, then check in with Drift like a co-host. If Drift stayed loose, the new dog seemed to breathe a little easier. A lot of them followed his lead, noticing that the dog who lived in silence wasn't afraid of this house, these people, this couch. My kids got in on it too. They learned the hand signs faster than I did and loved showing them off to their friends. They'd stand in the middle of the rug, tiny hands moving in serious patterns, explaining that dogs don't just listen with their ears, they listen with their eyes and their hearts. Drift would pat over, sit in front of them and prove the point. Over time, I realized Brio had changed. He was still young and silly, but there was a softness to him now, a pause before the pounce, like he was always checking the room for who might be overwhelmed. And Drift, the dog who once tried to disappear into the baseboards, started chasing slow games of tug, nudging toys toward terrified newcomers, as if to say, "I know the way out of this." One night, I walked past the gray couch and saw them both stretched out on the rug, paws just barely touching, chests rising and falling in the same easy rhythm. In that quiet, it finally hit me that this was never really a story about a broken Doberman. It was about a puppy who refused to accept another dog's silence as the end of the conversation. I thought I was bringing home a broken dog. All I really brought home was silence that needed someone willing to listen differently. Drift was never unfixable. He was deaf, terrified, and invisible in all the ways that matter. And the first one who really saw him wasn't me or a vet or a rescue worker with a clipboard. It was a 4-month-old German Shepherd puppy named Brio, who sat down in front of that shut-down dog and refused to walk away. I still think about how many completely shut-down dogs sit in shelter corners right now, labeled as lost causes, when some of them might just not hear the world yelling at them. How often does another dog, steady, patient, unwilling to give up, become their only bridge back to us? Brio didn't fix Drift with training or magic. He fixed him by staying, by touching his shoulder, by learning the language of his quiet. If you're watching this, I hope you won't be afraid of dogs like Drift. Ask questions about hearing, about vision, about why a dog shuts down. Consider opening your home to a problem dog who might just need someone to speak a different way. And if you've lived with a deaf, anxious, or broken dog who turned into the best companion you've ever had, please tell us their story in the comments. If this bond between Brio and Drift changed how you see shutdown shelter dogs, share this video with someone who needs to see it. Every view, every share, every comment helps another invisible dog get one step closer to being seen. Join our Brave Paws family. Be their voice. Be their hope.